Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MalciousCompliance, where you know the deal. People follow exact orders despite the ones they hate. And today's lineup includes mega Karen bosses, entitled customers, lazy students getting exposed, and not one, but two bosses who get themselves fired, despite thinking they're invincible. The lineup is awesome today, so grab a drink, sit back, and try not to shake your heads too hard in this one. I work in the dispatch department of a hospital, and it's my job to receive phone calls from clerks and nurses requesting porters. I take the call, input the information, and then send the information to a porter so they can proceed with the patient transfer, equipment delivery, that kind of stuff. That said, a certain department calls us incessantly asking for wheelchairs to be delivered. It doesn't matter how many wheelchairs they already have, they always call for more. They like to hoard them and hide them away in separate rooms, so it looks like they don't have any when the porter arrives with more. Now, in any hospital, hoarding any equipment creates delays for patient transfers. It's common sense, and this department's been getting away with this for years. Any complaint to management usually results in a temporary fix, about a week, in which we receive fewer requests for wheelchairs from said department. Anyways, on to my malicious compliance. It's been an extremely busy day, and the usual person from the hoarder department's been calling us excessively to get wheelchairs, and she's been rude about it every single time. So we try to explain that we need to keep some wheelchairs on reserve for other departments, which we have explained thousands of times before. And she just scoffs at me and my coworkers, and she repeats that she needs wheelchairs because she doesn't have any. At one point, this clerk calls me in a rage, and she's screeching in my ear how we still haven't delivered any wheelchairs, which we have. And then she screams at me saying, "Give us as many as you can send us, stat," and then slams the phone in my ear. At this very moment, I just thought, okay, I'll send you as many as we can. So I proceed to call a porter who's worked here a long time and knows the situation with the hoarder department very well. Also, he's retiring soon, and he's always been a guy that works around the rules, as we're all a union, so we can get away with a lot. So I tell him the situation, and I tell him very clearly they need as many as we can send them. At that, he chuckles and says, "Okay, no problem." About 30 to 45 minutes later, I get a call from the hoarder department. It's not the rage lady from earlier, unfortunately, but it was still very satisfying to hear them say, "Hey, can you please have a porter come remove some wheelchairs?" I say, "Sure, how many would you like removed?" She then says, and I kid you not, "As many as you can get out of the hallway. It's congested with wheelchairs, and it's a fire hazard." It's super satisfying to hear them want wheelchairs removed for once, but I figure they're exaggerating as usual. By this point, the porter who delivered them has gone home, so I call a different porter that I get along with, and I tell them the story. I send them up to assess the chaos and remove some wheelchairs. She calls back when she's up there, and she's laughing uncontrollably while telling me there's over 40 wheelchairs stuffed in the hoarder department and the connecting hallway. Apparently, the clerks were trying to push the entire collection of them out of the hallway at once because they couldn't get through the sea of wheelchairs to move them one by one. The retiring porter basically trapped them in their department with the wheelchairs, and surprisingly, no one got in trouble or talked to at all. I'm not even sure my coordinator heard about the situation. That one department is still consistent with calling for wheelchair delivery, but a little less so. The rude clerk is still rude, but she's very prompt on the phone, and she's a little less sassy than before, so I call it a win. At least she learned a lesson, right? I only wish Opie sent us a picture of what that hallway looked like. Like, just imagining 40 wheelchairs just blocking the whole hallway. What a brilliant move that was by the retiring porter who no longer gives a care. This next customer thinks they know more than a company that's been in the business for over 40 years. So here's a little background. I work for a logistics, packaging, and warehousing company that delivers freight all over the world. We have lots of customers who have issues with getting material in time to keep their production going. And when there's an issue with material, they usually listen to us since we know how to get something from A to B quickly. We have one customer who forgot to order material and now was close to shutting down his production. Fortunately, the supplier who was in another country had material on hand to deliver. We notified the customer that we could get material to him before shutting down his production, but we would have to ship this immediately so as to not delay his production. Now, since our company understands the needs of our customers, we usually just ship material if we know what's needed and we can't wait for approval. That said, this is the exchange that happened with me and their logistics manager, who thinks I apparently know nothing about anything. Also, since this material's in another country with a time difference of about 8 hours, you don't really have a lot of time to talk to people to get things moving. On day number 1, the logistics manager says, I need dimensions, weight, and also some quotes so I can make a decision on how we want to move this. I respond, I can try to get you that, but because you need it in a few days, and because of customs and the time difference, we really need this to move immediately. That's when the logistics manager says, I don't care. I need quotes, and I also want to quote this myself. To which I respond, okay, I'll ask our other office if they can provide that. So I talked to this other office at night, and we made the decision to ignore the logistics manager and just to fly it because a shutdown in production would cost them thousands of dollars per hour. On day number 2, the logistics manager says, do you have the quotes for me? And I respond, sorry, because of the time constraints that I explained to you yesterday, we shipped it already. And this is when the guy starts yelling at me saying, what do you mean you shipped it? I need quotes before I make a decision. I just say to him, as I explained yesterday, if I had waited for quotes, we would have lost 1 day. I tell him, you would have made a decision letting us know a few hours after our other office and the supplier's already gone. Then, to do customs and a flight, plus customs here at destination, would have taken another 2 to 3 days. Your production would have been at a minimum halted for 1 to 2 days. We had no other choice but to ship immediately. So on day number 4, they had their parts at the plant, but the logistics manager wasn't getting the freight costs approved, which means we weren't going to get paid. I then get a call from their purchasing department, who I get along great with. The purchasing manager tells me, hey, so I have this PO request on my desk, and my logistics manager's telling me you never gave him any quotes. I'm sorry, but without quotes, I can't approve this cost. To which I respond, hey, so here's the situation. Your logistics manager screwed up and he was gonna shut down your production because he has no clue how the international freight and customs works. If we had listened to him, he would have shut you down. We decide to ignore him because of that, and here's our email correspondence. I then attach all the emails and even one where he said that we should have shipped FedEx or UPS, which would have taken over a week to deliver. The purchasing manager, looking through the emails, begins laughing, and he says, I understand. I'll push this PO through, but from now on, just do what he says, even if you know we'll shut down. To which I respond, okay. So the following week, we then had the same issue again with some other material. We gave him quotes, which took a day, and let him make a decision. Not being completely malicious, we even warned him we need an answer immediately, so he wouldn't have any problems. He finally gave us an answer by morning of next day. This meant we had lost 2 days already. Then, we had to do the customs clearance, which takes another day. On day number 3, material goes to the airport. Day number 4, material flies out. Day number 5, the material arrives at the destination airport. And on day 6, since it's the weekend, there's no customs clearance until Monday. The logistics manager shut down his production by this point. Monday is customs clearance, and we get pulled in for customs inspection, which is more delays. The parts finally get delivered to them on day number 8 at the end of the day. His production has been down for 2 days already, and they're way behind. After this incident, we all get pulled into a meeting with the plant manager, the logistics manager, and the production manager to explain the royal F-up that happened. The logistics manager tried to blame us for everything, and he says we took way too long. Luckily, I have everything in writing informing him what will happen if we do it his way. We then get dismissed, and the logistics manager gets reamed out by the plant manager. From then on out, the logistics manager hasn't questioned us since, and when we tell him it needs to be done a certain way, he just accepts it. Yeah, just like the last post, at least the guy recognized his mistake, learned from it, and now just keeps quiet. But it really is common sense though. Like, if you hire someone who's a professional at something, maybe listen to them. And this person comments, I'm in a similar industry. Every couple of months, I get a deal like this. Emails speak louder than the ding-dong who thinks he knows more than me. And since we're on the topic of people thinking they know more than others, guys, this person shares a similar story. So I manage a small local retail store. We have an online site where people can place orders, and when this occurs, we'll get an email with the order summary, and one of the employees will find this item from the sales floor and then mail it out. Also, we offer free shipping over $69.99. On Tuesday, we receive an order for a shirt, and the man paid extra for 2-day shipping through FedEx. One of the girls that works with me collects his order, and since his order was over the minimum free shipping, she went ahead and gave him free shipping through USPS, and she sent him an email accordingly. About half an hour later, the guy calls on the phone, and I can hear the girl who processed his order apologizing to him repeatedly for about 10 minutes. She was visibly frustrated, but she stayed calm for the whole call until he hung up. She begins explaining to me that the customer was yelling at her for not processing the order the way he placed it. She doesn't get to finish her story before the phone rings again, and I answer this time to the voice of an angry customer. I let him fill me in on the details of why he's so mad. The guy aggressively explains to me that he paid for 2-day shipping and he needs his shirt by Saturday morning. The guy's furious that we've given him such poor customer service, and we didn't even inform him of the changes we made to his order. That's when I inform him that we found a way to save him $40, and we chose to ship using USPS. After he was too short of breath to yell at me anymore, I simply asked a few follow-up questions. I say to him, hey, I'm a little confused. Maybe you can clarify for me. Was there something you had against USPS? He screams and says, no, that's not the point. I don't care what company you ship from. To which I respond, okay, great. Well, we just went ahead and gave you free shipping since USPS will do the 2-day shipping. The guy's not listening, and he just goes on to scream and say, well, it's just bad customer service. I should have been notified. No one told me anything. I just got this stupid email saying that my package was going to be coming through USPS. I respond, I mean, isn't that us notifying you? The customer goes off on a rant how our customer service sucks and whatnot, and it ends something like this. I say to him, well, since you don't care which company we ship from and you just need it by Saturday, and the package is projected to be delivered Thursday, and we saved you $40, I'm not sure what the issue is. He then goes on to say, I don't care about the stupid $40. I should get what I paid for. Long story short, the guy wasn't getting it. I then say, well, if that's what you want, you betcha. I'll charge you the $40 for shipping. So this happened a couple of decades ago, and here's a bit of background. I'd been working for a kick-ass, medium-sized IT company for about 4 years. I had a good track record, but I moved to a department that didn't really fit my skills, and a very tall director told me I wasn't needed anymore. I thought I was out of a job completely, but the managing director called me in. He told me that the company needed to implement something called ISO 9000, which is a quality standard that aims to formalize all those processes and roles that contribute directly and indirectly to the quality of the company's products. He offered me a job partnering up with an external consultant. The consultant would project manage the effort, while I would be his assistant and full-time liaison person within the company. I later learned that consultant was a personal friend of managing director. Of course I said yes. The consultant was a nice enough person, but it soon became clear that he was out of his depth with the complexities of the project. Luckily, I had a coach, my brother-in-law, who was very experienced in this area, and he saw the warning signs when I talked about what we were doing. Within the company, there was a lot of skepticism because of an earlier failed project titled Quality Without Limits that soon became Limits Without Quality. So this time around, we needed credibility and some visible wins and senior management backing. However, the managing director left the company, and that kind of screwed up the senior management backing for consultant. Even worse, the new CEO was the very tall director who fired me earlier. And although he knew it was important, he didn't really want any involvement in the ISO 9000 project. Fast forward a couple of months and we haven't really achieved much. My relationship with the consultant's getting a bit strained, and I start wondering if I might become collateral damage of his lack of skills and leadership. The consultant asked me to book a few grand's worth of training for the two of us. I had to do it by a certain date. The date passed and he asked about the training. I said I hadn't booked it, and he blew up to level 5 and demanded to know why. I just said I didn't think he'd secured sufficient commitment from management to spend that much, and I didn't want to get stuck with an unauthorized spend. Now, he's at level 10 and crap starts flying. I was a bit taller than him, and he wanted to go into uber domination mode. So he screams at me saying, "Sit down." I respond, "I'm comfortable standing, thanks." To which he repeats himself and says, "Sit down." I just stand firm and I say, "No, I'll stay right here." He then says it again, "Sit the F down." Right about now, I'm shaking a bit, but I'm outwardly calm, and I say, "I'm good." He then says, "You need to get yourself to the effing CEO, explain your failure to book the training, and that you're the reason that we're gonna miss our first big deadline, and rectify this whole effing mess you've caused." Now, I really didn't know what the very tall CEO would do, and there was a very good chance that I would get thrown off the project and fired again, but it was time to come clean. So here's how I obeyed this whole rectifying the mess instruction. I got a meeting the same day with very tall CEO, and I told him that we had barely achieved anything over the several months the project had been running. I said the consultant was inept, hadn't grasped the basic concepts of the project, and that with him in the project manager role, it was destined for an expensive failure. I told him about the whole sit down episode. I also told the very tall CEO of another person in the company, who I reckoned would be a perfect fit for the project manager role. This was late on a Friday, and very tall CEO said, "Leave it with me." And he told me not to turn up until noon on Monday. I absolutely didn't know what was going to happen, and that weekend was really stressful. On Monday morning, I get a call from consultant, which I ignore. Nerve-shredding. Now, it's noon on Monday, and I'm in the building. I'm kind of bricking it. I'm outside the very tall CEO's office, and he's there with the guy that I suggested should be the new project manager, which is a good sign. They're laughing about something, which is another good sign. Cue me walking in, and very tall CEO says, "Hi, meet your new boss." Me thinking, wow, that went well. The CEO then goes on to say, "Well, I called the consultant into his office this morning and we had a chat." I then go on and say, "And?" He then says, "I told him we need a serious talk about this project, and I invited him to sit down." He started getting agitated and declined, and I asked again. He refused, and I said, either you sit down or you leave the building right now. The consultant sat down, and I explained I wanted to make some changes. Long story short, he left the building with all of his stuff an hour later, but only after I told him why we didn't want him any longer. Cue the empty speech bubbles coming out of my mouth. The CEO then goes on to say, I thought you might like the bit about him sitting down. I'm still speechless at this point. That's when my new boss says to me, okay, come on, let's have a catch up. And let me tell you, I was on cloud 9 for a few days, and my new boss was an absolute star, and I learned a ton from him. The ISO 9000 certification followed, and that project success opened up very interesting doors later. A long time ago, I was a university student majoring in literature. Naturally, I had a schedule packed with literature classes, and this group project took place during a course entitled Madness in Classic Literature. It was fun, the professor was zany, and the topics were rather interesting. Then one day, the dreaded group project assignment arrived, where we're split up into groups of 3 to do a 30-minute presentation on madness in any era of literature. I ended up with 2 studious-seeming partners, one of whom was emphatically invested in doing our project on madness in 1800 Scotland. She was persuasive, we were convinced, but when we told the professor, he kind of winced. He then held us after class, and he asked if we were sure. Well, this girl certainly was, and he kind of absently nodded, and he said he would help us find a couple of sources since literature in 1800 Scotland is apparently more scarce than one would think. We ended up with permission to cover Lord Byron by association, along with an incredibly long and dry text about some guy who's either hallucinating or having an existential religious experience with the devil himself. Now, I've read some boring text in my day, but this piece was far and away the most mind-numbing collection of words my brain's ever scraped itself against. To make matters worse, it soon became very, very apparent that neither of my partners, including this girl who was gagging over 1800 Scotland to begin with, had a single intention of doing any of the work for this project. Woe is me. So I just dove in and I did the entire project myself, including the required handouts that we were supposed to print out for the class to follow along with our presentation. And this is when I decided to get petty. I didn't want to be that student who rats on fellow students, but I also didn't want my partners, especially this girl whose love of Scotland forced me into this mess, to get off entirely scot-free. So with that, I memorized everything, and I mean everything. And for the worksheet, I basically wrote down bullet points that revealed nothing about the texts or their contents. So the day of the presentation arrives, and I meet my partners in class, and I give them the worksheets. They're relieved that I seem to know what I'm doing and suspect absolutely nothing. Our time comes, and we stand up in front of the class, with them on either side of me. I pass out the worksheets, and I proceed to talk about madness in 1800 Scotland from memory, going into exhaustive detail on Lord Byron and whatever the protagonist from the other text. My partners were silently nodding along for the entire 30 minutes. I finished speaking and then came to the Q&A portion of the presentation. Fellow classmates were encouraged to ask questions about our era, authors, etc. And it lasted about 15 minutes. So I picked a student who asked something about the religious aspects of the dry as heck text. Now I could have answered, but instead, I paused a long, pregnant pause, and I gave my partners a chance to answer instead, if they so wished. I let the excruciatingly silent seconds drag on every single time, looking slowly to both of them with each question and taking my sweet, sweet time before jumping in. Within a couple of minutes, it became incredibly evident to everyone that I was the only person in our project group that knew a single darn thing about our topic. So sure, I did the whole project and I let them think it was fine up until it wasn't. Was that petty? Absolutely, but by God, if I had to read that awful story because somebody else watched Outlander too many times, then I'm going to comply maliciously. And I'm happy to report the professor pulled me aside after the fact and said that given our performances, he would be grading me and my partner separately. I got an A, and strangely, they stopped talking to me after that group project, so I have no idea what grades they received. It was bad enough to cut contact though, so I'm assuming they failed. This happened several years ago at a company I worked for. I was hired into a position there, and I worked for a woman who we'll call Karen. And let me tell you, she was the worst manager I'd ever worked for. She knew very little about the department, and she couldn't figure out how to read or generate reports to show our department statistics. She was way more concerned with being everyone's friend than their boss. I was very good at the admin side of things, and although it wasn't my job, she eventually got me to start writing her reports for her that she would present at the weekly management meetings with all the department heads. Not only that, but I was to create and evaluate new sales campaigns and even conducting interviews and writing up employees who got into trouble. Basically, I started doing her job for her. All the while, she promised me there would be a new opening soon in a higher position, and all the extra work I was doing would be how she would justify to the higher-ups that I should get that job. Well, naturally, my own duties got pushed aside in favor of the super urgent things that she had me doing for her. One day, her boss's boss was doing a walkthrough of our department and called me out for some poor productivity on my accounts. Instead of explaining to him that I had permission to scale back on my daily work to do my new responsibilities, she proceeded to ream me out in front of everyone, and she promised him that it would be handled. That's when I realized that everything she told me was a lie. I stopped doing her work for her and I focused on my own. I went back to being the highest producer in the department, which I had also been before my new duties. Well, she got extra upset and she tried to write me up for disobedience when I told her that I wouldn't come in early and do her work for her again. And that was my last straw. I sent her an email with my 2 weeks notice and I CC'd my personal email account so I would have a copy of it. And she just replied, "Received." She sat there all morning, huffing and puffing, and eventually, she pulls me into the side room and she told me to hand in my keys and leave right then and there, that she wasn't gonna pay me for 2 more weeks when I wouldn't do what she said. To which I respond, no problem. I maliciously complied because what she doesn't realize was that when an employee gives their 2-week notice and you fill the position or ask them to leave before the time is up, you still have to pay them out. So I basically got 2 weeks of free pay I didn't have to work for. The GM of the company was on vacation that week, and when he got back, he was pissed that his highest producer was gone. He asked her what happened, and she lied about what happened. She said I was grossly insubordinate, and that's why I had to leave that day. Unfortunately, over the next month, the department went downhill so badly that her job was on the line. She actually reached out to me to see if I would come back and help her fix it. I said I would if she apologized and also gave me a raise and some other perks. She agreed, but when she went to HR to get the contract written up, the GM blocked it. He said they would never rehire someone who was let go for being grossly insubordinate. She couldn't admit the truth, so I didn't return, and she was fired shortly after. Listen, if only that Karen boss had the humility to admit that she was in the wrong, her job might have been saved, right? But yeah, it's always satisfying to hear that a power-tripping boss digs their own grave. And I hope the fact that OP was willing to come back and was only blocked by her own lies lives rent-free in her head for a really long time. That'll teach her. And with that brings us to another end of r/MalciousCompliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled people episode. where Karen neighbors are messing with the wrong people and they're getting their lives turned upside down. So yeah, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.